I never thought a change in stool or urine color could signal pancreatic cancer, or that symptoms might show on my feet. If only I had noticed earlier. Patients often say this during outpatient visits. Pancreatic cancer is one of the many
Among all cancers, it is one of the most difficult to detect and hardest to survive. However, sometimes the body sends out signs in unexpected places.
Whether you know those signs or not can make a big difference in what happens next.
Hello, this is YouTube Medical University. Let's watch a video today to help you start getting healthier tomorrow. Today's lesson has 3 parts. First, in the first period, I'll share 5 warning signs of pancreatic cancer that appear in the body and that you'll regret not knowing. Then, in the second period, I'll introduce a test that can check your cancer risk just by submitting a urine sample. And in the third period, I'll summarize everything and explain what you should do from a doctor's perspective. First, let's talk about pancreatic cancer as a disease. The overall survival rate for all cancers is about 64%, but for pancreatic cancer, it's only about 8.5%. Why is it so low? The pancreas is located behind the stomach. It's an organ deep inside the body. Symptoms are hard to notice, so it's also called the silent organ. However, this silent organ can sometimes show unexpected signs in your urine, stool, skin, or eyes. Let's take a look at 5 of them right away. Here are 5 unexpected warning signs of pancreatic cancer. The first one is this. It turns a dark orange color. The first sign is the color of your urine. As pancreatic cancer progresses, your urine may become noticeably darker than usual. For example, it may look like strong tea or orange juice, and in severe cases, it can even turn a dark cola-like color. Lately, if you notice your urine is darker, that's one sign. Why does this happen? This is where the structure of the pancreas comes into play. The pancreas is shaped like a tadpole, and about 80% of pancreatic cancers develop in the head of the pancreas. The bile duct, which is this tube, passes right next to the head. It's the pathway for bile, a digestive fluid produced in the liver. When the cancer grows larger, it blocks the bile duct like this. With nowhere to go, the bile flows back into the bloodstream. Then it circulates throughout the body with the blood and is eventually excreted through the kidneys as urine. The color of stool is brown, and in fact, this brown color comes from a substance in bile called bilirubin. Since this circulates through the blood and is excreted as urine, the color of urine becomes a dark orange or brownish color. This is a sign that something is happening. I think it will be easier to understand if you remember the reason as well. 5 unexpected SOS signs of pancreatic cancer. The second one is this. Stool becomes whitish. The second sign is the color of your stool. As I mentioned earlier, what makes stool brown is a yellow pigment called bilirubin. Just like before, if the bile duct gets blocked, the bilirubin containing bile can't reach the intestines. So the stool doesn't get its color and turns whitish. Urine becomes a dark orange. Stool turns white. Just by changing where the bilirubin goes, you get completely opposite changes. Here is the third of the 5 unexpected SOS signs of pancreatic cancer. Oil floating on the stool. The third one is fatty stool, where oil floats on the stool. Think of it like the chunks of oil floating on top of a rich bowl of ramen. That's the kind of image I mean. Just like that, oily stuff floats on the surface of the toilet water. When you wipe, it feels kind of sticky. These kinds of signs can also appear. The reason is simple. The pancreas is like a factory for digestive enzymes. It also produces something called lipase, which breaks down fat. But because of cancer, when those digestive enzymes can't reach the intestines, the fat doesn't get digested and comes out in your stool. Oil separates from water, right? That's why when you go to the bathroom, the fat in your stool floats. If you don't have a habit of checking your stool regularly, you might miss this, so please remember it. Here is the 4th unexpected SOS sign of pancreatic cancer: the whites of your eyes or your skin turning yellow. The 4th sign is jaundice. When I talked about the first sign, the color of your urine, I mentioned that bilirubin has nowhere to go and ends up in your bloodstream. When this bilirubin in your bloodstream deposits in your skin or eyes, your whole body can take on a yellowish tint, and even the whites of your eyes can turn yellow. Here's a photo of the whites of the eyes. They should be fully white, but they look yellowish if you look closely. This can be hard to notice, so please pay attention. After watching this video, please check the color of the whites of your eyes in the mirror. Your skin can also take on a yellowish color, and when that happens, you might also experience itching. That's also a characteristic of jaundice. One more thing to add, jaundice is not only a sign of pancreatic cancer. It can also appear when your liver is not healthy. If you notice your skin or the whites of your eyes turning yellow, see a doctor as soon as possible, regardless of the cause. By the way, if your hands turn yellow from eating too many mandarins, that's something completely different, so don't worry. Here is the 5th unexpected SOS sign of pancreatic cancer. It's when your blood sugar suddenly rises for no apparent reason. I think this is quite unexpected. Blood sugar and pancreatic cancer don't seem related at first glance, right? But this is also an important sign. The pancreas has another important role. That is to produce a hormone called insulin. This insulin is actually the only hormone in the body that can lower blood sugar. What happens if the pancreas is destroyed by cancer and can no longer produce insulin? That's right, the brake that lowers blood sugar stops working. Your blood sugar level will rise rapidly. You haven't been overeating or living an unhealthy lifestyle, and yet your blood sugar suddenly spiked during a checkup. Upon closer examination, it turned out to be pancreatic cancer. There are actually cases like that. And although it's not very common, there are 2 other important signs I want you to know about. Both of them are changes that appear in the legs. The first is the appearance of a red and painful lump in the leg. Even though it's pancreatic cancer, the sign shows up in the leg. That's pretty surprising, isn't it? But once you know the reason, it makes sense. Actually, cancer cells sometimes release substances that make the blood clot more easily. As a result, small blood clots can form in the veins of the legs, which are the pathways for blood flow. When that happens, the blood vessel becomes inflamed, turns red and swollen, and it hurts when you press on it. This is called thrombophlebitis, or inflammation of the vein caused by a blood clot. The second condition is called paniculitis. It's a difficult name, so you don't have to remember it. When you press on it, it hurts, and you may notice a red, raised area. This also makes sense once you know the reason. If you remember, the pancreas produces a digestive enzyme called lipase. When the pancreas is damaged by cancer or inflammation, this lipase can leak into the bloodstream in large amounts. The leaked enzyme travels through the blood all over the body and dissolves the fat under the skin on the spot. The dissolved areas become inflamed, turning into red and painful lumps. The enzyme that's supposed to break down food ends up dissolving your own fat, which it normally shouldn't break down. It's a truly frightening change. These changes in the legs can lead to suspicion of pancreatic cancer. You can't do that without knowing about it. Knowledge is a weapon. Let's keep learning together in the second half. So this is the first lesson, 5 unexpected SOS signs of pancreatic cancer. The first is dark orange urine. The second is white stool. The third is greasy stool with oil floating in it. The fourth is jaundice, where your eyes and skin turn yellow. And the 5th is a sudden rise in blood sugar levels. Additionally, I introduced changes like red lumps on the legs or redness of the skin. However, by the time these signs appear, the disease has often already progressed. That's why we want to find it before any signs appear. So what can we do now to detect it early? I'll talk about that in the second part. First, let's talk about reality. The pancreas is located behind the stomach, deep inside the abdomen. That's why there are almost no symptoms in the early stages. Even if you do an imaging test like an ultrasound, it's hard to see. This is the reason why early detection is so difficult. So what methods are there to find pancreatic cancer early? There's the abdominal ultrasound, which uses sound waves to look at your abdomen. There's also the CT scan, which takes cross-sectional images of your body. And then there are markers that increase as the cancer progresses. The main markers are proteins that are checked. The most representative one is CA19-9, and recently new tests have appeared, such as using nematodes or the smell of urine. However, to be honest, none of these methods have shown sufficient effectiveness. That's the current reality. For example, the main marker CA19-9 can be measured just by taking a blood sample. In advanced pancreatic cancer, the levels are high, but in small, early-stage cancers, they don't increase much. That's why it's not suitable for early detection. If a blood test could detect it, you might think public funds should cover it for everyone. However, widespread testing alone won't eliminate pancreatic cancer. It hasn't been proven that it significantly reduces deaths. Even if the government spends money, it can't reduce deaths. That's why the government. You can't tell everyone to get screened for pancreatic cancer. The reality is, the government only recommends 5 types of cancer screening. As I mentioned earlier, pancreatic cancer is not included here. The same goes for esophageal, kidney, bladder, and ovarian cancers. This is the gap in cancer screenings. How do we fill this gap? This is where new technology comes in. The key is microRNA. You don't have to remember the name. It's a molecule that even won the Nobel Prize in 2024. You've heard of DNA, right? It's the blueprint of our bodies. MicroRNA is a very short regulatory molecule made based on that DNA. It plays a role in finely regulating gene activity inside the cell. However, cancer cells basically disrupt this control and start proliferating in a way that's convenient for themselves. Moreover, it's believed that cancer releases its own unique microRNA from a very early stage. This is the most important point. Why does detecting this microRNA lead to early detection? With ultrasound or CT scans, cancer becomes visible to the eye. It won't show up until it reaches a certain size. Tumor markers also don't increase until the cancer has progressed to some extent. But this microRNA is a molecular level sign that appears before the cancer takes shape. So it's something that can't be detected by imaging. That's why there's hope that it could be detected even at an early stage. And it's been discovered that this cancer-derived microRNA is actually leaking into urine. A related journal of The Lancet, a world-renowned medical journal, has also shown that it's possible to detect signs of early-stage pancreatic cancer with a high probability from just 3 milliliters of urine. And what's more, this is research from Japan. Just think about that for a moment. You can determine cancer risk from urine. The clues to that hard-to-find pancreatic cancer are being flushed away every day. They're right there in your urine. No painful tests, no radiation, no hospitalization needed. Honestly, I was also amazed by the progress of medical science as I read the paper. The test that allows you to do this at home is called MySignal, developed by the startup Kuraifu from Nagoya University. The test I'm introducing today has been provided by Kuraifu. However, Kuraifu also told me that I don't need to hold back or be considerate at all. So as a doctor, I will objectively explain this test. When you send your urine, microRNA is analyzed by AI, and it checks for 10 types of cancer. Then it evaluates the risk for each type. These 10 types of cancer account for about 80% of all cancer deaths in Japan. And the main feature of this test is definitely its simplicity. Here, let me tell you about a serious issue in Japan. In fact, the cancer screening rate in Japan is very low compared to the rest of the world. When it comes to breast cancer and cervical cancer screenings, about 80% of people in the United States get screened, and even in neighboring South Korea, it's about 60%. In contrast, in Japan, it's only about 40%. Among developed countries, it's at the lowest level. One of the reasons is the burden of the examination itself. It's painful, it's embarrassing, and above all, it takes time. I completely understand how people tend to avoid it because they're not good with procedures like endoscopy. In that regard, this test only requires you to collect and send your urine. There's no need for needles, so there's no pain. You can do everything at home, and there's no need for dietary restrictions. For those who haven't been able to get tested at the hospital because the hurdle for testing was too high, this could be the first step. I also believe this is very valuable. Now, communities are starting to take action too. One example is Iwanai Town in Hokkaido, where I live. The cancer screening rate is
わずか 6% だったんです。この町で北海道大学と岩内協会病院が一緒に研究を行って、
When this test was distributed,
ステージ0のごく早期の肺がんが見つかって手術で完治した方もいらっしゃいました。ただこれは配った100人の
this is just one person's story. It doesn't mean that everyone's cancer will definitely be detected or cured.
この点は正直にお伝えしておきます。
And another example is Misato Town in Shimane Prefecture. In fact, here, for the first time in Japan, a local government has started an initiative to publicly fund this test. A test that usually costs about 70,000 yen can be taken for about 15,000 yen out of pocket. The local government is going so far as to introduce this using tax money. This shows just how much attention and expectation society has for this. So who is this actually recommended for? This is where my own opinion comes in, and it's important. Let me introduce an interesting study. Up until now, most of these tests have compared people with cancer to healthy people. However, in a recent paper from 2026, a more in-depth test was conducted. Here, the comparison is between people with pancreatic cancer and those at high risk for pancreatic cancer, specifically people with diabetes, chronic pancreatitis, or pancreatic cysts. That includes pancreatic cysts, as well as people with a family history of pancreatic cancer. Instead of randomly testing healthy people, they focused on people who may be at higher risk. They tested if they could identify pancreatic cancer in these people, making it more like a real medical exam, such as for those with a family history or pancreatic changes. People with conditions like pancreatitis have a higher risk of pancreatic cancer. Doctors want to perform tests on these kinds of people. They can tell apart people with cancer from those who are just worried but healthy. The accuracy was at a high level. Specifically, out of 10 people who were worried, about 8 cases of cancer were correctly detected. And even for early stage pancreatic cancer, about 70% were identified. Being able to distinguish this many cases among people who are worried, not just healthy people, is a meaningful result. And it's not just limited to the pancreas. In lung cancer research, it has been reported that about 9 out of 10 cases of early stage lung cancer were detected. Moreover, people who did not have cancer were not mistakenly identified as positive. The accuracy was also close to 90%. For esophageal cancer as well, results show that about 8 out of 10 people could be identified. As a technology, it's not just pie in the sky. It's not just wishful thinking. They're consistently making progress and proving themselves. Hearing this makes you consider trying it, doesn't it? So just how accurate is it in practice? Can this test really detect cancer at an early stage? Actually, many of the high scores I just mentioned are based on case control studies. These are called case control studies, where they already know who has cancer and who doesn't, and then test whether the method can distinguish between the two groups. In other words, these results were obtained in situations where the answers were already known. But real cancer screenings are different, right? You don't know who has cancer. You have to find them over many years from among a large group of people. Research that closely resembles these real-world situations is still in the process of being verified. So I think it's safer to take the numbers I mentioned earlier with a bit of caution. And the most important thing is whether it can be found early. Finding it early and not dying from cancer are two different things. This might be a bit difficult to understand, but even if it's found early, to prove that it actually extends your lifespan, you need to follow tens of thousands of people for many years. Even with the world-leading blood test called Gallery, they tried it on about 140,000 people and still haven't been able to show that it reduces advanced cancer. That just shows how high the bar is. My signal still has this left to prove. And it's not a test for diagnosing diseases. Please keep in mind that it's strictly for risk assessment after all. Since this has gotten a bit long, let me summarize up to this point. My signal is by no means a suspicious test. On the contrary, there is solid research backing it up. It's a proper technology, and I was very impressed. However, it's still in the developmental stage with research ongoing. Whether people who take the test will actually be less likely to die from cancer is still an open question, so please keep that in mind.
まず土台は生活習慣の改善。
And what the government recommends.
作型のがん検診の5つです。
And do you know what the risk factors for pancreatic cancer are? Things like smoking, heavy drinking, and diabetes. So taking measures against these risks and getting cancer screenings are the most fundamental things. On top of that, if you spend money, make sure it's worthwhile. This is for anyone who wants to protect their health, finds procedures like gastroscopy or colonoscopy difficult, and still wants to know their cancer risk early. I think my signal is one of the tests worth considering. And especially, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a family member with pancreatic cancer. For people who are already at high risk, like those I just mentioned, I think this urine test is definitely one of the options to consider. In fact, the study I introduced today focused specifically on high-risk people like this. If further research progresses in the future, the evaluation may change as well. If you're interested, please consider it after understanding the details I discussed in the second period. And actually, I also tried it myself. The method was really simple, and I didn't have to leave my house at all. First, the kit arrives at your house. After collecting your urine with the kit, you just apply online. After that, someone actually comes to your house to pick up the urine, so all you have to do is hand it over at the door and you're done. About 3 weeks after handing it over, the results arrived at my house. Here is what I actually received. In my case, all 8 areas that were tested were low risk. And what I honestly found interesting was this. Even though I only submitted 3 mils of urine, they were able to read over 900,000 microRNAs from 658 different types just from the urine. I was honestly surprised as a doctor that you can learn this much information about your own body, and the quality check was also very thorough. They thoroughly checked the condition of the urine and any contaminants before conducting the measurements, and it was clearly stated that this was done. That was also a reassuring point. Furthermore, when you apply for this test online, there is a lifestyle questionnaire, and based on the results of that questionnaire, they also assessed my future cancer risk. Plus, since they give you multifaceted advice that includes your lifestyle habits, I thought it could be seen as an investment and an opportunity to reevaluate your own health. If anyone is interested in trying it, there is a special discount available for viewers. If you apply through the link in the description, the discount will be applied automatically. And one more thing, for those who already have symptoms that concern them, symptoms like the ones I mentioned earlier, if you have symptoms like abdominal pain or weight loss, please make sure to consult a doctor instead of just getting tested. Pancreatic cancer can show warning signs in various parts of the body, such as urine, stool, eyes, skin, and feet, as I explained. And there is research accumulating on tests that check cancer risk through urine. However, these are still in the research stage. But the foundation is lifestyle habits and cancer screening programs. On top of that, if you're interested, you can also consider this MEMA signal. Medicine is advancing every day. If promising studies come up, I'll share them in videos as soon as possible. Please subscribe now so you don't forget which channel this is. I'd really appreciate it. And how many of the 5 national screenings have you taken? If you don't mind, please let me know in the comments. Well then, that's the end of today's lesson. Let's meet in the next video. For those who watched until the end, I have one announcement. I've created a place to share more in-depth, interactive health information with you. This is Kokokara, the primary care consultation room for mind and body. Many people are concerned about their health, but in the end, they don't know what to believe. I receive a lot of such comments. Here, I address everything from how to interpret your medical checkup results and how to deal with medications to matters like caring for your family members. I actually receive many consultations, and I personally answer each one within 24 hours. If interested, join my free official Line account. Each month, we send sample videos of our member content so you can see what this place is like. Openings are announced first to people who are registered online. Please check the very first link in the description for registration. We look forward to hearing from you.